The February wind cut through Ash Hollow like a blade. Wade Holloway stood at the edge of the town square, watching snow devils twist across the frozen dirt street, and wondered, not for the first time, why the hell he'd agreed to this circus. 42 years old. Built like he'd been carved from the same granite that broke through the prairie soil. Scars on his knuckles from every fight he'd won, and a few he hadn't. Owner of the largest cattle operation in the Northern Territory, a spread so vast it took 3 days to ride from one boundary line to the other. And somehow, despite all that, the Ash Hollow Town Council had decided Wade Holloway needed a wife. "You can't run an empire alone forever," Councilman Pritchard had said 6 weeks ago, standing in Wade's ranch office like he owned the place. "A man of your standing needs a proper household, heirs, stability." Wade had nearly thrown him out. But Pritchard kept talking, kept pushing, kept organizing until Wade finally gave in just to shut everyone up. One afternoon, one ridiculous mail-order bride gathering, then they'd leave him the hell alone. That's how Wade ended up standing in the town square on the coldest day of the year, staring at a line of 9 women who'd traveled from points east, each one hoping to trade uncertainty for security. The town had turned out to watch. Of course they had. Nothing drew a crowd in Ash Hollow like spectacle, and this qualified. Merchants stood in doorways. Ranch hands clustered near the saloon. Women whispered behind gloved hands while their husbands pretended not to stare. The 9 mail-order brides stood in a nervous line near the general store, arranged by some invisible social hierarchy Wade couldn't be bothered to understand. Most were young, early 20s, maybe younger, dressed in their finest clothes, or what passed for finest after weeks of hard travel. Hair pinned up, posture carefully arranged, smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. They looked terrified. Wade hated it immediately. "Mr. Holloway," Pritchard said, appearing at his elbow like a persistent fly. "Shall we begin the introductions?" "I know how to walk a line, Pritchard." Of course. I simply thought, you've done enough thinking." Wade moved forward before Pritchard could say another word. The first woman was tall, dark-haired, couldn't have been more than 19. She smiled at him with practiced brightness. "Good afternoon, Mr. Holloway. My name is—" "Not interested." He kept walking. The second woman tried a different approach. Demure, eyes downcast, voice soft as morning mist. Wade didn't slow down. The third one was blonde, confident, met his eyes directly. "I'm told you run the finest ranch in the territory. You were told right. I grew up on a farm in Ohio. I know hard work." "Good for you." He moved on. Behind him, the crowd stirred. Confused murmurs rippled through the gathered townspeople. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Wade was supposed to stop, to talk, to choose someone. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this whole thing was wrong. These women hadn't come here for love. They'd come because they had no other options. Bad marriages behind them, families that couldn't feed them, frontier promises that sounded better than slow starvation back east. And now they stood in the freezing cold, being inspected like livestock, hoping some strange man would claim them before nightfall. Wade kept walking. The fourth woman. The fifth. The sixth. Pretty faces. Desperate eyes. Rehearsed words. He was halfway through the line when he realized he wasn't going to choose any of them. He'd go through the motions, tell Pritchard it didn't work out, and ride back to the ranch alone. Then he reached the end of the line and stopped. The woman standing there wasn't like the others. She was older, mid-30s, maybe older. Heavy-set, with a round face that had seen too many hard years. Her dress was clean but worn, patched in places, the kind of garment that had been repaired so many times the original fabric was barely visible. Her boots were scuffed leather, practical rather than pretty. But that wasn't what made Wade stop. It was the way she stood. While every other woman in that line had arranged herself to be looked at, shoulders back, chin up, expressions carefully composed, this woman stood like she'd already given up. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, wasn't smiling or making eye contact or doing any of the small performances the others had attempted. She just stood there holding a battered suitcase, staring at the frozen ground, waiting for this humiliating parade to be over. Wade recognized that posture. He'd seen it in horses too broken to fight back, in men who'd lost everything and were just waiting for the final blow, in himself years ago, before he'd clawed his way up from nothing. "What's your name?" he asked. The woman's head jerked up, surprise flashing across her face, like she couldn't quite believe someone was talking to her. Mara, she said quietly. Mara Bennett. Her voice was rough, tired, the voice of someone who'd spent years being ignored. You want to be here, Mara Bennett? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She glanced at the other women, at the crowd, at the frozen dirt beneath her feet. No, sir, I don't. Honest. Wade almost smiled. Then why'd you come? The agency said there'd be meals and lodging while the choosing happened, and if nobody picked me, they'd help me find work in town. She stopped herself, swallowed hard. I needed to survive the winter, that's all. Behind Wade, someone laughed. He didn't turn around, but he heard the whispers starting. The town was realizing he'd stopped at the wrong woman, the one nobody expected, the one who didn't fit their pretty picture of what a rancher's wife should look like. You know anything about ranching? Wade asked. No, sir, but I learned fast. I can cook, clean, repair clothes and equipment. I'm good with animals. I don't complain about hard work. Why's a woman with those skills come all the way out here for a mail order arrangement? Mara's jaw tightened. For a moment, Wade thought she might lie, might give him some soft story designed to pull at his sympathy. Instead, she met his eyes directly for the first time. Because back home, it doesn't matter what skills you have if nobody wants to look at you long enough to notice. The truth of it hung in the cold air between them. Wade had spent his entire adult life reading people. You didn't survive in territory this brutal without learning to spot liars, cheaters, and men who'd put a knife in your back for a plot of good grazing land. This woman wasn't any of those things. She was just exhausted, done pretending, too worn down to perform for an audience that had already decided she wasn't worth their time. Wade respected that more than any practiced smile or pretty dress. He turned to face the crowd. Pritchard stood there with his mouth hanging open. The merchants had stopped whispering. Even the ranch hands near the saloon had gone quiet. I'll take her, Wade said clearly. The silence that followed could have shattered glass. Then the noise started, gasps, shocked murmurs, someone's inappropriate laughter cut short. Wade watched the reaction ripple through the crowd like wind through wheat. Mara just stood there, frozen, like she hadn't quite processed what he'd said. You, Pritchard stammered forward. Mr. Holloway, perhaps you'd like to consider— I've considered. We done here? But surely— Pritchard. Wade's voice dropped to the tone he used with stubborn cattle and stupid men. We, done. Here. The councilman's mouth snapped shut. Wade turned back to Mara, who was staring at him like he'd grown a second head. You got belongings besides that suitcase? No, sir. Just this. Then let's go. We've got a long ride ahead, and I want to be off the open prairie before dark. Mara looked around wildly like she was searching for the trap, the cruel joke, the moment when everyone would start laughing at her expense. You're serious? Don't make jokes. Don't waste time. If you're coming, let's move. He started walking toward where his horse was tied. Behind him, he heard Mara's boots crunch through the snow as she hurried to follow. The crowd parted as they moved through the square. Wade felt their stares like heat against his back, heard their whispers even though he couldn't make out the words. Let them talk. Wade Holloway had built his life on not giving a damn what other people thought, and he wasn't about to start now. He helped Mara onto his spare horse, a steady mare named Birdie, without comment. She settled into the saddle awkwardly, clearly not used to riding, but she didn't complain. They rode out of Ash Hollow with the entire town watching. The first hour passed in silence. The landscape stretched out around them, endless white prairie broken by dark patches where wind had scoured the snow down to frozen grass. Distant hills marked the horizon. The sky was that particular shade of gray that promised more snow before nightfall. Cold enough to make your teeth ache. Quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat. Wade let the silence sit. He'd never been comfortable with unnecessary conversation, and he figured Mara needed time to process what had just happened. He certainly did. What the hell had he been thinking? He hadn't planned to choose anyone, had barely wanted to show up at all. And yet the moment he'd seen that woman standing at the end of the line, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world, something had shifted. Wade couldn't explain it, didn't particularly want to. But he knew truth when he saw it, and Mara Bennett had been the only honest thing in that entire dog and pony show. "Can I ask you something?" Mara's voice broke through his thoughts. Wade glanced over. She was sitting straighter now, more confident on the horse than she'd been when they started. "Go ahead." "Why did you choose me?" Straight to it. No dancing around. Wade appreciated that. "You were the only one standing there without begging to be chosen." "That's it?" "That's enough." "Mr. Holloway." "Wade. If we're going to be living under the same roof, you can skip the formalities." "Wade." She said his name carefully, testing it. "I need you to understand something. I'm not what you think I am. I'm not a good wife. I've never been married. I don't know how to run a big household or host dinners or any of those things rich ranchers' wives are supposed to do." "Good. I don't host dinners." "I'm being serious." "So am I." Wade pulled his horse to a stop. Bertie halted beside him. They sat there in the middle of the frozen prairie while the wind howled around them. "Listen," Wade said, "I don't know what you think I'm expecting from you, and I don't know what kind of arrangement you're expecting from me, but here's the truth. I didn't want a wife. Town council pushed it. I went along to shut them up. I was planning to walk that whole damn line and leave alone." "Then why?" "Because you were real. Everyone else was performing. You were just trying to survive. I respect survival more than performance." Mara stared at him for a long moment. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. "Honesty. Hard work if you're willing. And maybe," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "maybe just don't lie to my face. That's about it." "That's all? You expected more?" "I expected—" She trailed off, shook her head. "I don't know what I expected." Wade nudged his horse forward again. After a moment, Mara followed. They rode in silence for another mile before she spoke again. "They all laughed at you back there," Mara said quietly. "The town. They thought you were crazy for choosing me. Let them think what they want. Doesn't it bother you? People have thought I was crazy for 30 years. Built a ranch anyway, still standing, still profitable. Their opinions don't feed my cattle or fix my fences. That's a lonely way to live." Wade glanced at her. There was no judgment in her voice, just observation. "Maybe," he admitted, "but it's mine." The ranch came into view just as the sun started dropping toward the western horizon. Wade watched Mara's face as they crested the final hill and the full spread appeared below them. The main house sat in a shallow valley, protected from the worst winds by the surrounding ridges. It was a solid structure, timber and stone, built to last through brutal winters and scorching summers. Not fancy, but well-maintained, functional. Around it, the ranch sprawled across the landscape. Barns, corrals, storage buildings, miles of fence line stretching in every direction, and beyond that, grazing land that seemed to go on forever. "This is all yours?" Mara asked, and Wade heard the disbelief in her voice. "This is all ours," Wade corrected. "If you're staying." They rode down into the valley as the first evening stars began appearing in the darkening sky. The ranch house was cold when they entered. Wade hadn't been back in 3 days. He'd stayed in town dealing with the bride situation and council meetings and all the other bullshit that came with owning property people wanted. He moved through the familiar space lighting lamps while Mara stood just inside the door, still holding her suitcase, looking around with wide eyes. It wasn't much to look at. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting space all at once. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Rough-hewn furniture that Wade had built himself years ago, shelves packed with supplies, tools, and the accumulated debris of a man living alone. Clean, mostly. Organized in its own way. But clearly a bachelor's space, functional, empty of anything soft or decorative. "There's 2 bedrooms, Wade said, moving to the fireplace to start a fire. "One's mine, other one's yours. You'll have privacy." Mara set her suitcase down slowly. "You're not expecting me to—" "No." Wade cut her off before she could finish that sentence. "Whatever the town thinks happens in marriages, that's not why you're here. You need a place to survive the winter. I need—" He paused, realizing he didn't actually know how to finish that sentence. "Hell, I don't know what I need, but it's not that." "Then what is this?" "An arrangement. You work the ranch, help keep the place running. I provide food, shelter, pay you fair wages. End of winter. If you want to leave, you leave. If you want to stay, we figure it out. Simple as that. Nothing's that simple. It is if we make it that simple. Wade got the fire going and straightened up. Mara was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Part suspicion, part confusion, part something that might have been hope if hope hadn't been beaten out of her years ago. Look, Wade said, I know you've probably been treated like shit most of your life because of how you look. I know what the town thinks. I know what assumptions people make, but out here? He gestured at the dark windows, the vast ranch beyond. Out here, there's just you and me and the work. Nobody else's opinions matter. You pull your weight, I pull mine. That's the deal. And if I can't pull my weight, then we figure it out. I'm not throwing you back to the wolves over one bad day. Mara's eyes got bright suddenly. She turned away quickly, staring at the fireplace like it was the most interesting thing she'd ever seen. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice rough. I'm not used to people being decent. So if I seem suspicious or difficult or like I don't trust you, it's not personal. It's just self-preservation. Yeah, I get it. And he did. Wade had spent his own years learning that most people couldn't be trusted, that kindness usually came with strings attached, that the world would grind you down if you gave it half a chance. The difference was he'd had the advantages of being born male, strong, and eventually wealthy enough to tell the world to go to hell. Mara hadn't had any of that. There's food in the cellar, Wade said, breaking the heavy moment. Not much fresh, but enough to make a decent meal if you're hungry. I need to check on the horses and make sure everything's secure for the night. Take your time settling in. Your room's the door on the left. He headed for the exit before she could respond, pulling his coat tight against the cold. Outside, the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. Wade's breath misted in the air as he crossed the yard toward the barn. His ranch hand, Tommy, appeared from the bunkhouse as Wade approached. Boss, Tommy nodded. Heard you brought someone back from town. News travels fast. Town's talking about nothing else. Ryder's been coming through all evening with updates. Tommy grinned. They say you picked the fat girl nobody wanted. The grin died when Wade's expression didn't change. They say that, do they? I'm just repeating what... Her name's Mara. She's going to be working the ranch. You and the other hands treat her with respect, same as you'd treat me. Anyone has a problem with that, they can collect their pay and leave. Clear? Tommy swallowed hard. Clear, boss. Good. Everything secure? Yes, sir. Cattle are settled. No fence breaks today. Keep an eye on the north pasture. Thought I saw coyote tracks up there yesterday. Will do. Wade dismissed him and spent the next hour checking the barn, the equipment, the horses. Routine work that steadied his mind. By the time he returned to the house, golden lamplight glowed in the windows and the smell of cooking food drifted on the cold air. Wade pushed through the door and stopped. The main room looked different. Nothing major. Mara hadn't rearranged furniture or redecorated. But small changes had appeared. The stack of dirty dishes Wade had left by the wash basin had been cleaned and put away. The scatter of papers on the table was now a neat pile. Tools he'd left lying around had found their way back to their proper places. And Mara stood at the stove, stirring something in a large pot, her worn dress covered by an apron she must have found somewhere. She looked up when he entered. I hope you don't mind, she said quickly. I found some potatoes and salt pork in the cellar. Made a stew. It's not fancy, but smells good. Oh. She looked surprised. Well, it should be ready in a few minutes. Wade hung his coat and moved to the table. Mara had set out 2 bowls, 2 spoons. Simple. Practical. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the wind outside. The stew was better than good. It was the kind of food that stuck to your ribs, the kind that made sense in country this cold. Mara had stretched basic ingredients into something filling and flavorful. You said you could cook, Wade observed. You weren't lying. I don't lie about the things I can do, just the things I can't. What can't you do? Be what people expect me to be. Wade looked up from his bowl. Mara was staring at her food, her expression distant. People expected you to be small and pretty and grateful, Wade said. Grateful for any scrap of attention, any man willing to overlook what they see as flaws. Yes. I'm not those people. I'm starting to believe that. She met his eyes. But I've been disappointed before. Fair enough. They finished eating. Mara washed the dishes while Wade added more wood to the fire. The domestic routine felt strange. Wade couldn't remember the last time he'd shared space with another person like this. I'm going to turn in, he said finally. You need anything, just holler. I'm a light sleeper. Thank you for... Mara gestured vaguely at the house, the meal, everything. For all of this. It's just food and a roof. It's more than that, and you know it. Wade didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded and headed to his room. He lay in bed that night listening to the wind howl across the prairie and the old house creak and settle around him. For the first time in years, the place didn't feel quite so empty. And Wade wasn't sure yet if that was a good thing or a dangerous complication. The first week passed in a strange rhythm. Mara rose early, earlier than Wade, which surprised him. By the time he emerged from his room each morning, she'd already started the fire, put coffee on, and begun whatever task she'd assigned herself for the day. She didn't ask permission, didn't wait for direction. She just worked. Wade found her in the tack room one afternoon, repairing harnesses with quick, practiced hands. Where'd you learn that? He asked. My father was a teamster before he died. I grew up around horses and leatherwork. You're faster than half my ranch hands. They probably never had to repair the same harness 15 times because they couldn't afford a new one. Fair point. Another day, he discovered her reorganizing the storage cellar with brutal efficiency. Spoiled food thrown out, remaining supplies grouped by type, everything labeled and accessible. You didn't have to do all this, Wade said. You're paying me to work. This is work. I know what you meant. Mara straightened up, wiping dust from her hands. But I need to earn my place here. I need to prove I'm worth keeping around. You don't have to prove anything. Yes, I do. Maybe not to you, but to myself. Wade left her alone after that. He understood the need to prove yourself, had spent his entire life doing the same thing, but the town hadn't forgotten. The whispers reached the ranch in bits and pieces, ranch hands coming back from supply runs, neighbors stopping by with thinly veiled curiosity. Everyone wanted to know about Wade's new wife, the fat woman, the desperate one, the one nobody else wanted. Mara heard it too. Wade could see it in the way she tensed whenever riders approached, the way she made herself scarce when townspeople visited, the way she seemed to shrink into herself whenever the outside world intruded on their small bubble. The breaking point came 2 weeks after she'd arrived. Wade had gone into town for supplies, and Mara had insisted on coming along. She needed fabric, she said, needles and thread. Some personal items she couldn't get at the ranch. They rode into Ash Hollow in the late morning, and Wade immediately felt the shift in atmosphere. People stared. Not subtly, either. They stopped in the middle of the street to watch Wade and Mara pass. Whispered behind hands, pointed, like she was a circus attraction rather than a person. Wade's jaw tightened. They split up at the general store. Mara to find her supplies, Wade to arrange the delivery of feed and equipment. He was negotiating with the merchant when he heard the laughter. Sharp, cruel, the kind of laughter designed to hurt. Wade turned toward the sound. 3 women stood near the fabric section, Mrs. Pritchard, Mrs. Donovan, and Mrs. Shaw, the wives of the town's most prominent men, and they were talking about Mara. Can't imagine what he sees in her. Desperation, probably. No decent woman would move out to that isolated ranch. She certainly doesn't look like she's missed many meals. More laughter. Mara stood frozen in front of a bolt of fabric, her face burning red, her hands clenched at her sides. Wade moved before he could think twice about it. Mrs. Pritchard, he said loudly, cutting through their conversation like a knife. Got a question for you. The 3 women turned, their expression shifting from malicious glee to forced politeness in an instant. Mr. Holloway, Mrs. Pritchard simpered, you were just being cruel to my wife in the middle of a public store. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. We didn't mean, yes, you did. You meant every word. Now here's my question. Wade took a step closer, and all 3 women backed up. Your husband works for the bank that holds loans on half the ranches in this territory, including several that wouldn't survive without my cattle contracts. You want to keep mocking my wife? That's your choice. But those contracts come up for renewal in 6 months, and I've got a long memory. Mrs. Pritchard's face went white. You wouldn't try me. Wade turned to Mrs. Donovan. Your husband runs the feed supply. I spend more money in his store than any 10 other ranchers combined. Keep that in mind. Then to Mrs. Shaw. And your husband's the town doctor. Funny how word spreads when someone's known for cruelty. People start thinking twice about who they want caring for them when they're vulnerable. He let the words hang there for a moment, making sure they understood he wasn't bluffing. My wife, Wade continued quietly, is worth 10 of you put together. She works harder, complains less, and has more integrity in her little finger than you've shown in your entire lives. You want to gossip about her? Fine. But you do it where she can't hear you. And you remember that there are consequences for cruelty in this territory. The three women scrambled away like startled chickens. Wade turned to find Mara staring at him, her eyes wide and shimmering with something that might have been tears. Wade, let's get your supplies and go home. They finished shopping in heavy silence. The entire store had gone quiet, everyone pretending they hadn't just witnessed that confrontation. On the ride back to the ranch, Mara finally spoke. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. You threatened those women's husbands, threatened their livelihoods. And I'd do it again. Wade, no. He pulled his horse to a stop, and Mara did the same. Listen to me. I don't know what your life was like before you came here, but I can guess. I can see it in the way you flinch when people raise their voices, the way you apologize for taking up space, the way you expect cruelty as the default. Mara's throat worked, but she didn't speak. You're not there anymore, Wade continued. You're here, on my ranch, under my protection, and I don't let people hurt what's mine. I'm not yours. This is just an arrangement. Mara, he said her name gently, carefully. You're under my protection. That's not negotiable. That's not something you have to earn. That's just how it is. Understand? She looked at him for a long moment, then she nodded once, quickly, and turned her horse toward home before he could see her crying. That night, after dinner, after the dishes were washed and the fire was banked and the house had settled into quiet, Mara knocked on Wade's bedroom door. It's open. She pushed the door ajar but didn't enter. Wade sat on the edge of his bed, removing his boots. I need to tell you something, Mara said. All right. I've been planning to leave. Wade's hand stilled on his bootlaces. Oh? Ever since I got here, I've been planning it, saving money from what you've paid me, figuring out where I could go, what I could do, because I didn't believe, her voice cracked. I didn't believe this was real. I didn't believe anyone would actually choose me, actually defend me, actually... Mara, no, let me finish. She took a shaky breath. But today, when you stood up to those women, when you threatened their entire lives just to protect me, I realized something. What's that? I want to stay. Wade looked up at her. Mara stood in the doorway, backlit by the lamp in the main room, her expression vulnerable in a way he'd never seen before. Not because I need to survive the winter, she continued. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I think maybe here, on this ranch, with you, I could be something I've never been before. What's that? Enough. The word hung between them, heavy with years of pain and rejection and disappointment. Mara, Wade said carefully, you've been enough this whole damn time. You just needed someone to notice. Her face crumpled. She pressed one hand against her mouth, fighting for control. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I shouldn't be. Stop apologizing for having feelings. I'm not used to. I know. Wade stood up, crossed the room to stand in front of her, not touching, just close enough that she could feel he was there. I know you're not used to it, but you're allowed to cry. You're allowed to be scared or grateful or angry or whatever else you're feeling. You don't have to perform stoicism for me. Everyone expects. I'm not everyone. Mara looked up at him, and Wade realized for the first time just how much of her life she'd spent keeping walls up, protecting herself, making herself smaller and quieter and less demanding because that's what survival required. I didn't choose you despite who you are, Wade said quietly, echoing the words he'd thought that first day in town. I chose you because you were the only honest thing in that whole damn place, and I'd make that same choice again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Why? Because honesty matters more than beauty. Strength matters more than appearance. And you're the strongest person I've met in years, Mara Bennett. You just don't see it yet. She broke then, cried like she'd been holding it back for decades, which she probably had. And Wade stood there and let her, because sometimes that's all you could do for someone who'd been hurt too many times, just be present while they finally fell apart somewhere safe. When the storm passed, Mara wiped her eyes roughly. "Sorry," she muttered. "Stop apologizing." "Sorry for apologizing." Wade almost smiled. "Go get some sleep. Tomorrow we've got work to do." Mara nodded and turned to leave. She made it 3 steps before looking back. "Wade? Yeah? Thank you for being the kind of man who stops at the end of the line." Then she disappeared into her room, closing the door softly behind her. Wade stood alone in the hallway, staring at nothing, and wondered when exactly this arrangement had stopped feeling temporary. When had it started feeling like something permanent, something that mattered? He didn't have an answer, but as he climbed back into bed and listened to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling around him, Wade realized something fundamental had changed. For 42 years, he'd built his life on isolation, on not needing anyone, on being sufficient unto himself in this brutal, unforgiving territory. But maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong about needing to face everything alone. Maybe strength wasn't just about what you could survive by yourself. Maybe it was also about recognizing when someone else's presence made you stronger. Outside, the wind howled across the frozen prairie. Inside, for the first time in a long time, Wade Holloway's house felt like something more than just a place to sleep. It felt like a home. And the woman sleeping in the next room, the one the town had dismissed, the one nobody else had wanted, the one who stood at the end of the line expecting nothing and receiving everything, she felt like the missing piece he hadn't known he was searching for. The piece that would either save them both, or destroy everything when the world finally came for them. Because it would come. It always did. And when it arrived, Wade and Mara would have to decide whether this fragile, unexpected thing they'd built was worth fighting for. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, they were just 2 damaged people finding unexpected peace in the middle of the frozen frontier. And for now, that was enough. Spring came slowly to the Northern Territory that year. The snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass and frozen mud underneath. Ice broke up in the creek beds with sounds like gunshots echoing across the valley. The cattle grew restless as the weather warmed, eager to spread out across grazing land they hadn't seen in months. And Mara Bennett became someone she'd never been before. It started small. Wade noticed it first in the way she moved through the ranch. No more hesitation. No more apologizing for existing. She walked into the barn like she owned it, sorted through equipment with confident hands, gave orders to ranch hands twice her size without flinching. Tommy had been skeptical at first. Most of the men had been. But after Mara fixed a broken wagon wheel faster than any of them could, repaired a section of corral fence that had been giving them trouble for weeks, and organized the storage system so efficiently that supply runs got cut in half, the skepticism faded. Respect took its place. Not universal respect, not the kind that came easy, but the grudging acknowledgement that she knew what she was doing and wasn't afraid of hard work. Wade watched her transformation with something between pride and concern. Pride because she was finally becoming the person she'd always been underneath the layers of protection and survival instinct. Concern because the rest of the world wasn't ready for it. Ash Hollow certainly wasn't. The town had settled into an uneasy truce after Wade's confrontation in the general store. People were polite to Mara's face now, careful, measured politeness that came from fear rather than genuine acceptance. But the whispers continued. They reached the ranch in fragments, carried by travelers and traders and neighbors who thought Wade should know what people were saying about his wife. She's got him under some kind of spell. It's not natural, a man like that choosing a woman like her. She must have trapped him somehow, probably pregnant. Give it 6 months. He'll send her back where she came from. Mara heard them too. Wade could tell by the way her shoulders tensed whenever they rode into town, the way she kept her head down in public spaces, the way she seemed to brace herself for impact every time someone new arrived at the ranch. But she didn't talk about it. Not until the afternoon in late March, when everything came to a head. Wade was in the north pasture checking fence lines when he heard hoofbeats approaching fast. He turned to see Tommy riding hard, his horse lathered and breathing heavy. "Boss," Tommy called out, pulling up short. You need to come back to the house. What happened? Mrs. Holloway, Mara, she's. Tommy hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. There's some women from town at the house. It's not going well. Wade was already mounting his horse. They rode back at a pace that would have been reckless on rough terrain, but Wade didn't care. Something cold had settled in his gut the moment Tommy said those words. He reached the ranch house to find 3 horses tied out front, expensive animals with fancy saddles that marked their riders as wealthy townswomen. Inside, he found Mara standing rigid in the middle of the main room, while Mrs. Pritchard, Mrs. Donovan, and Mrs. Shaw sat in his chairs like they owned the place. "Wade," Mara said when he entered, and he heard the warning in her voice, "these ladies came to offer me some advice." "That's so." Wade looked at the 3 women, none of whom had the decency to appear ashamed. "What kind of advice?" Mrs. Pritchard stood up, smoothing her expensive dress. "Mr. Holloway, we came as friends. To help your wife understand certain expectations—" "Get out!" The words came out flat and cold. Mrs. Pritchard blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "I said get out of my house, now. We only wanted to—" "I don't care what you wanted. You came here to tear down my wife because your own lives are so empty you need to hurt someone to feel powerful. I'm not interested in your advice, your expectations, or your presence. Leave." Mrs. Shaw made an offended sound. "The nerve! You've got 30 seconds before I throw you out myself, and I promise it won't be gentle." The 3 women scrambled for the door, gathering their skirts and their dignity. Mrs. Pritchard paused in the doorway. "The whole town is talking, Mr. Holloway, about how she's changed you, how you've become—" "I've become what?" "Unreasonable, volatile. People are saying she's a bad influence. People can go straight to hell, clocks at 20 seconds. They left. Wade waited until he heard hoofbeats fading into the distance before he turned to Mara. She stood exactly where he'd left her face pale, her hands shaking. "What did they say to you?" Wade asked quietly. "It doesn't matter." "Mara, they said—" Her voice cracked. "They said I needed to understand my place, that I was embarrassing you by acting like I belonged here, that ranch wives were supposed to be refined and educated and thin, that I should lose weight if I wanted to keep you interested, that everyone knew you only married me out of pity, and the sooner I accepted that, the better off I'd be." Wade felt rage settle into his bones like ice. "And what did you say?" "I told them to leave. They wouldn't. They just kept talking, kept saying these things like they were doing me a favor by being honest." Mara finally looked at him. "I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to throw them out myself, but I couldn't. I froze. I just stood here and took it like I've been taking it my whole life." "You're not weak for freezing." "I feel weak." "You're not." Wade crossed the room to stand in front of her. "You know what those women are?" "What?" "Terrified." Mara laughed bitterly. "Of what? Me?" "Yes, you. Because you're proof that their entire worldview is wrong. They've spent their whole lives believing that beauty equals worth, that appearance determines value, that women like you don't deserve men like me." Wade paused. "And then you show up, and I choose you over everyone else. You work harder than anyone. You run this ranch better than I did alone, and it destroys their entire understanding of how the world works. So they came here to put me back in my place. They came here to make themselves feel better, and it didn't work, because you're still here and they're still miserable." Mara sank into a chair, all the tension draining out of her at once. "I'm so tired, Wade. Tired of fighting. Tired of defending my right to exist. Tired of people looking at me like I'm something shameful that needs to be hidden or fixed or—" "I know. Do you? Do you really know what it's like to have your body treated like a moral failing? To have people assume they know everything about you based on what they see?" Wade pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "No," he admitted. "I don't know what that's like, but I know what it's like to be poor. To have people look at you like you're dirt they scraped off their boots. I know what it's like to fight for every scrap of respect, every inch of land, every moment of dignity. It's not the same." "No, it's not. But I understand the exhaustion, the constant battle, the way it grinds you down until you're not sure if you're fighting for something or just fighting because you don't know how to stop." Mara met his eyes, and something passed between them, Recognition, maybe. Understanding. What do I do? She asked quietly. How do I keep going when the whole world wants me to disappear? You stop caring what the world wants. You care about what you want, what we want, what happens on this ranch between these fences. Wade leaned forward. The world's going to hate you no matter what you do. Might as well be hated for being yourself instead of hated for trying to be something you're not. That's easy for you to say. No, it's not. It's the hardest thing in the world, but it's the only way to survive with your soul intact. Mara was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. I was happy here, she said finally. For the first time in years, maybe the first time ever, I was actually happy, and they can't stand it. They have to come here and try to take it away. They can't take anything unless you let them. Wade, I mean it. Those women have no power here. The town has no power here. The only people who matter on this ranch are you and me. Everyone else is just noise. The noise is getting louder. Let it. We'll get louder too if we have to. A small smile tugged at Mara's mouth despite everything. You're very good at making threats. Years of practice. She laughed, a real laugh this time, not bitter or broken, just honest. And Wade realized that sound had become important to him, more important than it should be for what was supposed to be a simple arrangement. But nothing about this had been simple from the beginning. The trouble was, Wade was starting to realize just how complicated things had become, and how much he stood to lose if it all fell apart. That night, after dinner, Mara disappeared into her room and returned with a folded piece of paper. I need to show you something, she said, handing it to Wade. He unfolded it carefully. The paper was worn, creased from being folded and unfolded many times. The handwriting was feminine, precise. It was a letter. Dear Mara, it began. I hope this letter finds you well, though I suspect life has not been kind since we last spoke. I'm writing to tell you that your sister Catherine passed away last month. Fever took her quick. She didn't suffer long. Your nephews are with their father's family now. They asked about you. I didn't know what to tell them, since you never write. If you're still alive somewhere, you should know that people here haven't forgotten what happened. Your name still gets mentioned sometimes, usually with pity or disgust. I thought you'd want to know about Catherine. Maybe you don't care. Maybe you've moved on, but family is family, even when it's broken. Emma. Wade read it twice, then looked up at Mara. When did you get this? 3 days before I came to Ash Hollow. It was waiting for me at the agency. Mara sat down heavily. Catherine was my younger sister, 5 years younger. She was everything I wasn't, pretty, delicate, the kind of girl men wrote poems about. What happened? She married young, a good man, everyone said, wealthy family, big house, everything a girl was supposed to want. Mara's voice went flat. But he hit her, not where anyone could see. He was smart about it. Wade's hands tightened on the letter. I found out about it one day when she came to visit me. Saw the bruises. She begged me not to tell anyone, said it would get better, said she could handle it. Mara looked at the fire. But it didn't get better. It got worse. So I went to their house one night when he was drunk and I told him if he ever touched her again, I'd kill him myself. What did he do? He laughed at me. Said nobody would believe a fat unmarried woman over a respectable man. Said I was jealous because no man would ever want me the way men wanted Catherine. Mara's jaw tightened. So I broke his nose and 2 of his ribs and told him the next time would be worse. Wade felt something like admiration cut through his anger. Catherine's husband went to the sheriff, claimed I attacked him unprovoked. His family had money and influence. My family had nothing. The sheriff told me to leave town or face charges. Mara's voice shook. So I left, and I never saw my sister again. And now she's dead, and I don't even know if she ever forgave me for leaving. You didn't leave her. You were forced out for trying to protect her. Doesn't matter. The result's the same. She died, and I wasn't there. Wade set the letter down carefully. Is that why you came west? To get far enough away that your past couldn't follow you? Partly, but also because I had nowhere else to go. No family, no money, no prospects. The agency was the last option before... She trailed off. Before what? Before I decided living wasn't worth the effort anymore. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and honest. Wade understood that feeling, had felt it himself in the early years when the ranch was failing and the winter seemed endless, and the loneliness pressed in from all sides. I'm glad you didn't make that choice, he said quietly. Me too, most days anyway. Mara looked at him. I showed you this because I need you to understand something. I'm not a good person, Wade. I'm not some innocent victim the world was cruel to for no reason. I'm violent. I'm angry. I have a temper I don't always control. And if those women come back here and push me again, I can't promise I'll just stand there and take it. Good. Mara blinked. What? I said good. I don't want you to stand there and take it. I want you to fight back. Wade, you broke your sister's husband's ribs because he was hurting her. That doesn't make you a bad person. That makes you someone who protects people she loves. I respect the hell out of that. The world doesn't see it that way. The world can go to hell. I see it that way. And on this ranch, my opinion is the only one that matters. Mara stared at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. You really mean that, don't you? Every word. Why? Because I'm tired too, Mara. Tired of pretending I care what Ash Hollow thinks. Tired of playing politics with people I don't respect. Tired of being alone when I don't have to be. Wade paused. You asked me once why I chose you. That's why. Because you were real, and I needed real more than I needed anything else. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the promise of more cold weather before spring fully arrived. What if I'm not strong enough? Mara asked finally. What if they keep coming and I break? Then you break, and we figure it out. But you're stronger than you think, and you're not alone anymore. That's got to count for something. It counts for everything, Mara said softly. They sat together in the firelight, two damaged people building something fragile and precious in the ruins of their separate pasts. And for a moment, Wade let himself believe it might actually last. The moment didn't survive the week. Word spread through Ash Hollow faster than prairie fire. Wade Holloway's wife had assaulted a man back east, broke his bones. Nearly killed him, some versions claimed. And now she was here, living on the biggest ranch in the territory, with access to weapons and horses, and who knew what else. The story grew with each telling. By the time it reached the town council, Mara had become a violent criminal, a dangerous woman, a threat to the community. Wade heard about it from Sheriff Morrison, who rode out to the ranch 3 days after the letter incident. Morrison was a decent man, former soldier, fair-minded, not easily swayed by gossip, but he looked troubled as he dismounted in Wade's yard. Wade, he said, we need to talk. They stood in the barn, away from the house where Mara was working. The council's worried, Morrison said without preamble. Stories are going around about your wife, about violence back east. Stories, Wade repeated flatly. Is there truth to them? She defended her sister from an abusive husband, broke his nose, that's the truth. That's not how the story's being told in town. I don't care how it's being told. Morrison sighed. Wade, I know you don't give a damn about town opinion, but this is different. People are scared. They're saying she's dangerous. Some are saying you might be in danger. Wade laughed, a harsh, angry sound. Let me get this straight. Those same people who mock my wife for being fat and unwanted are now claiming she's dangerous? They can't have it both ways. People aren't logical when they're scared. People aren't scared. They're malicious. There's a difference. Maybe so. But the council's talking about asking her to leave town, banning her from businesses, making it clear she's not welcome. They try that, I'll pull every contract I have with every business in Ash Hollow. See how welcome their money is when I take it elsewhere. Wade, I'm done negotiating with these people, Morrison. I'm done pretending their opinions matter. Mara's my wife. She lives on my land. And unless you've got actual charges to file, this conversation is over. Morrison studied him for a long moment. You care about her, he said finally. This isn't just about pride or spite. No, Wade admitted, it's not. Then be careful, because the more you protect her, the more they're going to push. And eventually something's going to break. Let it break. I'll deal with the consequences. Morrison shook his head but didn't argue further. He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Wade standing in the barn with a cold knot of worry in his gut. The sheriff was right. Something was going to break. Wade just hoped it wouldn't be Mara when it did. That evening, he found her sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Sheriff came by, Wade said, settling into the chair beside her. I saw. What did he want? To warn me that the town's working itself into a panic over you. Mara didn't react, just kept staring at the horizon. I should leave, she said quietly. No. Wade, I'm making your life harder. I'm costing you business relationships, community standing. I don't care. You should care. This ranch is your life's work. I'm not worth destroying that over. Wade turned to look at her. You want to know what this ranch was before you got here? What? Empty, functional, profitable, well-run, but empty. I'd built something impressive and I had nobody to share it with. Nobody to care if I succeeded or failed. Just me and the cattle and the endless work. He paused. You made it a home, Mara. You made it matter. So don't tell me you're not worth it. The town can burn for all I care. The only thing that matters is what happens here on this land, between us. Everything else is just noise. Mara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't know how to let someone fight for me, she admitted. I've spent so long fighting alone, I don't know how to accept help. You're not accepting help. You're accepting partnership. There's a difference. Is there? Help implies one person is weak and needs saving. Partnership means we're both strong enough to stand alone, but choosing to stand together anyway. Wade reached over and took her hand, the first time he'd deliberately touched her beyond helping her on and off horses. I'm not fighting for you because I think you're weak. I'm fighting with you because I think together we're stronger than anything they can throw at us. Mara looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. When did this stop being an arrangement? She asked. Don't know. Somewhere between you fixing the harnesses and standing up to those women. Somewhere between dinner conversations and watching you become the person you were always supposed to be. Wade, you don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for declarations or promises. I'm just telling you the truth. This stopped being temporary for me a while ago. It stopped being temporary for me too, Mara said softly. That's what scares me. Because everything good in my life eventually gets taken away. Not this time. You can't promise that. Watch me. They sat together as the sun dropped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. And Wade held Mara's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because it was. 2 weeks later, the first fire started. Wade woke to Tommy pounding on the door in the middle of the night, shouting about smoke and flames. The small storage barn on the eastern edge of the property was burning. By the time they got the fire out, the building was a total loss. Tools, feed, supplies, all gone. Accident? Tommy asked as they stood in the smoking ruins at dawn. Wade crouched down, examining the burn patterns. No. Look here. Multiple ignition points. Someone set this deliberately. The ranch hands gathered around, their faces grim. Who would do this? One of them asked. Wade had a pretty good idea, but he didn't say it out loud. Over the next month, 3 more fires broke out on the property. A fence section burned. Part of the hay storage. A small equipment shed. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to be threatening. Enough to send a message. The cattle started disappearing too. Not many, just a few head at a time. But consistent enough that it couldn't be blamed on predators or wandering stock. Wade increased patrols. Posted guards. Tried to catch whoever was doing this. But the attacks continued. And then the rumors started reaching the ranch, whispers that Mara was behind it all, that she was sabotaging Wade's operation to gain control, that she'd shown her true colors as a violent, manipulative woman who'd trapped a good man for his money. It was so absurd Wade almost laughed. Except the people saying it weren't joking. The breaking point came on a cold April morning when Wade rode into town for supplies and found a crowd gathered in the town square. Someone had posted notices on every building. Concerned citizens of Ash Hollow, the notices read. We can no longer ignore the threat in our midst. Mrs. Mara Holloway has brought violence and destruction to our peaceful community. Her criminal past and current suspicious activities make her a danger to all law-abiding residents. We demand action from our town council before more harm is done. Wade tore down every notice he could reach, but the damage was done. That afternoon, a delegation from the town council arrived at the ranch. 5 men on expensive horses, led by Councilman Pritchard, looking uncomfortable but determined. Wade met them in the yard. Behind him, ranch hands stopped working to watch. Mr. Holloway, Pritchard began, We need to discuss the situation. No. I haven't even... I know why you're here, and the answer is no. My wife isn't going anywhere. The community has concerns. The community can take their concerns and... Wade, Mara's voice cut through his anger. She'd come out of the house and stood on the porch, her face pale but composed. Let them talk, she said quietly. Mara, let them talk. I want to hear what they have to say. Wade stepped back reluctantly. Pritchard cleared his throat. Mrs. Holloway, we've received multiple complaints about incidents on your property, fires, missing livestock, and given your history, the town feels it would be best if you, if I left, Mara finished, for everyone's safety. Including Wade's? Yes. Mara descended the porch steps slowly, deliberately. She crossed the yard until she stood directly in front of Pritchard's horse. Let me make something very clear, she said, her voice carrying across the yard. I defended my sister from a man who was beating her. That's my history. That's my crime. I broke his nose and his ribs because he was hurting someone I loved and nobody else would stop him. The council members shifted uncomfortably. As for the fires and missing cattle, Mara continued, I have no idea who's responsible, but I find it interesting that these problems only started after certain people decided I wasn't welcome in this community, almost like someone's trying to drive me away by making me look dangerous. That's a serious accusation, Pritchard said. It's an observation. But here's what's not an observation. I'm not leaving. This is my home. This is my ranch. And no amount of gossip or intimidation is going to change that. Mrs. Holloway, you can take your concerns back to town and tell them I said to mind their own business. And if whoever's setting these fires is listening, you can tell them I'm not scared. I've survived worse than vandalism and rumors. Wade felt something like pride swell in his chest. This was the Mara he'd been waiting to see, the one who fought back instead of freezing, the one who'd broken her sister's husband's bones because someone had to. Pritchard looked at Wade. You're really going to let her speak to us this way? She doesn't need my permission to speak, Wade said. But yes, I'm going to let her, and I'm going to back every word she just said. Now get off my property. The delegation left. But Wade knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. That night, lying in bed, Wade stared at the ceiling and tried to calculate how bad things could get. The town was against them. Someone was actively sabotaging the ranch, and winter would come again eventually, bringing isolation and vulnerability. But when he thought about backing down, about sending Mara away to appease people he didn't respect, he couldn't do it, wouldn't do it. Whatever was coming, they'd face it together, even if it destroyed everything he'd built. Because some things were worth more than money, or land, or community standing. And Mara Bennett Holloway, the woman nobody wanted, the one who'd stood at the end of the line expecting nothing, had become one of those things. The only question now was whether they were strong enough to survive what came next. The answer came 3 days later in the form of a stranger riding up the long approach to the ranch. Wade was in the barn shoeing a horse when Tommy came running in, breathing hard. Boss, there's someone here to see you. Says his name's Victor Kane. Wade's hand stilled on the horse's hoof. He knew that name. Everyone in the territory knew that name. Victor Kane owned half the rail lines in the Northern Territory and had his fingers in every profitable venture within 200 miles. Land speculation, timber rights, water access, cattle contracts. If there was money to be made, Kane was making it, and he had a reputation for getting what he wanted by whatever means necessary. Wade set down the horse's leg and walked out into the yard. The man waiting there looked nothing like the ruthless businessman Wade had heard about. Kane was maybe 50, well-dressed in city clothes that seemed absurd against the rough frontier backdrop, with a pleasant face and an easy smile. But his eyes were cold when they assessed Wade. Mr. Holloway, Kane said, dismounting smoothly. I appreciate you taking the time to see me. Didn't realize I had a choice. Kane's smile widened. Always direct. I appreciate that in a man. Saves time. What do you want? To make you a very generous offer. Kane pulled a folded document from his coat. I represent a syndicate of investors interested in consolidating grazing rights throughout this region. We're prepared to pay you substantially above market value for your property. Wade didn't take the document. Not interested. You haven't heard the number yet. Don't need to. This ranch isn't for sale. Mr. Holloway, I understand sentiment, But surely you can see the advantages of not for sale, Wade repeated. You can leave now. Kane's pleasant expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. I'd heard you were a stubborn man. I'd hoped the rumors were exaggerated. He tucked the document back into his coat. May I ask why you're so attached to this particular piece of land? There are other properties, other opportunities. This is my home. That's reason enough. Ah, home. Kane glanced toward the house where Mara had appeared on the porch. Yes, I'd heard you'd recently acquired a wife. Congratulations. Though I understand that situation has caused some tension with the local community. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Wade took a step closer to Kane. Whatever you're implying, say it plain. I'm not implying anything. Simply observing that a man in your position, with a controversial wife, facing vandalism and social ostracism, might find it easier to start fresh elsewhere. My offer would give you the resources to do exactly that. Your offer can go straight to hell. Mr. Holloway, you done talking? Kane studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. For now, but I should mention that my syndicate has already acquired mineral rights to most of the surrounding territory. We control water access to 3 of the 4 major creek systems in this valley, and we've recently secured contracts with the railroad that will make it very difficult for independent ranchers to ship cattle east at profitable rates. Is that supposed to scare me? It's supposed to inform you. The territory is changing, Mr. Holloway. Men who adapt will prosper. Men who resist will find themselves obsolete. Kane mounted his horse with practiced ease. I'll be in the area for the next few weeks, he said. If you reconsider, you can find me at the Ash Hollow Hotel. The offer won't be available indefinitely. He rode away without waiting for a response. Wade watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then turned to find Mara standing beside him. That's the man behind the fires, she said quietly. Can't prove it. Don't have to prove it to know it's true. Mara crossed her arms. He wants you desperate enough to sell. He'll be waiting a long time. Wade, I'm not selling. Not to him. Not to anyone. Even if he makes things worse? Especially then. You don't reward that kind of behavior by giving in to it. Mara was quiet for a moment, staring in the direction Kane had gone. My sister's husband was like that, she said finally. Charming in public, vicious in private. Everyone thought he was wonderful until they saw what he did behind closed doors. You think Kane's dangerous? I think he's the kind of dangerous that hides behind money and influence. The kind that doesn't get his own hands dirty. She looked at Wade. Those are the hardest men to fight. Maybe, but I've been fighting hard men my whole life. This is just one more. That night, Wade called a meeting with all the ranch hands in the barn. 12 men gathered in the lamplight. Tommy, old Charlie, who'd worked the ranch for 15 years, young Davis, who'd just signed on last fall, and 9 others who'd made Wade's operation successful. Most of you have heard about Victor Kane by now, Wade began without preamble. And you've all seen what's been happening around here. The fires, the missing cattle, the tension with town. The men nodded, their faces grim. Kane wants this land. He's going to keep pushing until either I sell or something breaks. I'm not selling. Wade paused, letting that sink in. Which means things are going to get worse before they get better. And I need to know if you're staying or going. What do you mean? Tommy asked. I mean, if you want to leave, now's the time. I'll pay you through the end of the month and give you good references. No hard feelings, but if you stay, you're staying for a fight. And I can't promise how it'll end. The men looked at each other. Old Charlie spoke first. I've worked this ranch since before you owned it, Wade. Worked it when it was just a failing homestead with more debt than cattle. I'm not leaving because some city bastard wants to play land baron. I'm staying, Tommy said immediately. One by one, the others agreed. Davis, the youngest, looked nervous but determined. My pa always said a man's measured by who he stands with when things get hard. I'm staying. Wade felt something loosen in his chest, relief mixed with gratitude, mixed with the weight of responsibility. All right then, here's how we're going to handle this. Double the patrols. Nobody works alone. If you see something suspicious, you report it immediately. We protect the cattle, the buildings, and each other. And nobody... He looked at each man in turn. Nobody starts violence. We defend what's ours, but we don't give Kane an excuse to bring the law down on us. Understood? Understood, they chorused. One more thing. Wade glanced toward the house. My wife is off limits. I hear anyone disrespecting her, speaking ill of her, or giving her grief, you answer to me. She's been through enough without getting it from the people who should have her back. We've got no problem with Mrs. Holloway, Charlie said. She's proven herself 10 times over. Good. Then we're clear. The meeting broke up, men dispersing to the bunkhouse or their evening duties. Wade stayed in the barn, checking equipment and trying to quiet his mind. That was a good speech. He turned to find Mara standing in the doorway. How much did you hear? All of it. She stepped inside, closing the door against the evening cold. You didn't have to defend me to them. Yes, I did. They already respect me. I can feel it when we work together. Maybe, but I needed them to know where I stand. No ambiguity, no room for doubt. Mara moved closer, studying his face in the lamplight. You're scared, she observed. Wade didn't bother denying it. Yes. Of Kane? Of losing this. All of it. The ranch, the life we've built. You. He met her eyes. I've spent 42 years building something that matters, and now it's all at risk because I won't bend to some rich man's pressure. You could sell, Mara said quietly. Take his money. Start over somewhere else. Is that what you want? No, but I don't want you to lose everything because of me either. This isn't because of you. It's because of Kane's greed and the town's prejudice and a dozen other things that have nothing to do with you. Wade, listen to me. He took her shoulders gently. Even if I could go back and make a different choice that day in town, I wouldn't. Even knowing everything that would happen, I'd still choose you. You understand that? Mara's eyes glistened. Why? Because some things are worth fighting for, and you're one of them. She kissed him then, sudden and fierce, and tasting like salt from tears she wouldn't let fall. Wade pulled her closer, and for a moment the danger and uncertainty faded into the background. For a moment, there was just this. Two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, holding on to something fragile and precious in the middle of a gathering storm. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Mara rested her forehead against his. We're going to lose, she whispered. Maybe. Kane has money and influence and no conscience. We have a ranch and some loyal hands and stubbornness. You're forgetting something. What? We have each other. That counts for more than you think. Mara laughed, a broken, hopeful sound. You're an optimist underneath all that gruff rancher exterior. Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my reputation. They stood together in the quiet barn, holding each other like they could keep the world at bay through sheer determination. But the world was coming whether they were ready or not. The attacks escalated over the next 2 weeks. A section of fence was torn down in the night, letting cattle scatter across open range. It took 3 days to round them all up. Someone poisoned the water supply in the south pasture. Wade had to relocate an entire herd to save them from contaminated water. More fires broke out, small, controlled, designed to harass rather than destroy, but constant enough to keep everyone on edge. And through it all, Victor Kane remained visible in Ash Hollow, playing the concerned businessman, making sympathetic noises about Wade's troubles while quietly buying up surrounding properties and securing contracts that would choke Wade's operation. The town watched and waited. Some people were sympathetic. Sheriff Morrison kept Wade informed about Kane's movements, though his hands were tied without evidence of wrongdoing. But others saw opportunity in Wade's troubles. Old rivals who'd resented his success for years whispered that maybe Kane's way was better, more modern, more progressive. And always, the whispers came back to Mara. If Wade hadn't married that woman, none of this would have happened. If he'd chosen someone appropriate, someone respectable, the town would stand with him. But he'd chosen wrong, and now he was paying the price. The whispers reached Mara through a dozen different channels. Ranch hands who overheard gossip in town. Suppliers who couldn't quite hide their disdain. Even well-meaning neighbors who thought she should know what people were saying. Wade watched her absorb each blow, saw her shoulders tighten fractionally with each new report. But she didn't break. Instead, she got angry. Wade came back from checking the north fence one afternoon to find Mara in the barn, throwing hay bales with violent precision. What happened? He asked. I went into town for supplies. And Mrs. Pritchard told me I should convince you to sell, for your own good. Because you'd obviously lost your sense of judgment since marrying me and someone needed to protect you from your own bad decisions. Wade felt rage spike through him. What did you say? I told her that Wade Holloway had survived 20 years in brutal territory before I showed up and would probably survive 20 more after I'm gone, and that if she was so concerned about bad judgment, she should examine why she spends so much energy tearing down other women instead of building anything herself. Despite everything, Wade smiled. How'd she take that? About as well as you'd expect. She threatened to have me banned from the general store. She tries that, I know what you'll do. You'll threaten their businesses and their livelihoods and probably get into a fight with half the town council. Mara threw another hay bale with unnecessary force. But you shouldn't have to. I shouldn't be the reason you're at war with everyone. You're not the reason. They are. Semantics. Wade crossed the barn and caught Mara's wrist before she could throw another bale. Look at me, he said. She did, reluctantly. This fight isn't about you. It's about Kane wanting land I won't sell. It's about a town that can't handle anyone who doesn't fit their narrow expectations. It's about power and greed and prejudice that existed long before you arrived. Wade paused. You're just the excuse they're using. If it wasn't you, they'd find something else. That doesn't make it easier. I know. I'm so tired of being the excuse, Mara said, and her voice cracked on the last word. All my life I've been the excuse, the reason things went wrong, the problem that needed to be solved, and I'm sick of it. Then stop accepting that narrative. How? By fighting back. Not just defending yourself, but actively pushing back against their bullshit. Mara stared at him. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we stop being defensive. Stop reacting to what Kane and the town do. Start making moves of our own. Like what? Wade's mind was racing, pieces clicking together. Kane's been buying up surrounding properties, right? Consolidating control? Yes. But he hasn't bought everything. There are still independent ranchers out here. People who probably don't like being squeezed any more than I do. So maybe it's time we talk to them. Build an alliance. Make it clear that we're stronger together than we are separately. Mara's expression shifted from frustration to calculation. You want to organize the other ranchers against Kane. I want to show him he's not the only one who can play power games. He wants to isolate us. We'll build community. He wants to control the territory. We'll prove there's another way. That's risky. Some of those ranchers might side with Kane, might see you as the problem. Maybe. But some won't. And those are the ones we need. Mara was quiet for a long moment, thinking it through. This could work, she said finally, or it could make things exponentially worse. It's going to get worse anyway. Might as well go down fighting on our own terms. A slow smile spread across Mara's face. The smile of someone who'd been backed into a corner for too long and had finally found a way to push back. All right, she said. Let's do it. They spent the next week riding across the territory, visiting every independent rancher they could find. Some were hostile. The Johnsons shut the door in their faces. Old man Peterson told them he'd already sold to Kane and suggested Wade do the same. But others listened. The Ramirez family, 4 brothers running cattle on hard land east of Ash Hollow, heard Wade out and agreed immediately. Kane tried to buy us out 3 times, Miguel Ramirez said. Each time the offer got lower. He's not negotiating. He's waiting for us to get desperate. The McAllister widow, running her late husband's spread with 2 teenage sons, was more cautious but interested. I can't afford a war with Kane, she said. But I can't afford to lose this land either. It's all I have left. That's why we need to stand together, Wade said. Alone, he can pick us off one by one. Together, we have leverage. By the end of the week, they had 8 ranching families committed to the alliance. Not an army, but enough to matter. They held the first meeting in Wade's barn on a cold May evening. 23 people crowded into the space. Ranchers and their wives, sons and daughters old enough to understand the stakes, even a few hired hands who'd been with their families for years. Wade stood at the front, feeling the weight of their attention. Thank you all for coming, he began. I know it wasn't easy. I know some of you are risking Kane's displeasure just by being here. We're all risking Kane's displeasure just by existing, Miguel Ramirez called out. Might as well do it together. Nervous laughter rippled through the group. Wade laid out the situation, Kane's systematic acquisition of territory, His manipulation of water rights and rail contracts, the vandalism and pressure tactics designed to force holdouts into selling. He wants to own everything, Wade said. And he's got the money and connections to do it. But what he doesn't have is our unity. If we work together, share resources, support each other through the pressure, we can outlast him. What does that actually mean? Someone asked. Sharing resources? It means if Kane cuts one of us off from water access, the others provide it. If he manipulates rail contracts, we find alternative shipping routes together. If he tries to bankrupt one ranch, the rest of us pool resources to keep it afloat. Wade paused. It means we stop competing with each other and start operating as a collective unit. That's asking a lot, Mrs. McAllister said. We've been competing for the same grazing land and water sources for years. We have, Wade agreed. But Kane's not competing. He's conquering. And we either adapt or we all lose. The discussion went on for 2 hours. Arguments erupted about territory boundaries, water rights, historical grievances between families. At one point, Wade thought the whole thing would fall apart over a fence line dispute from 15 years ago. But then Mara stood up. I know I'm the outsider here, she said. The newest arrival, the one some of you probably think caused all this trouble. The room went quiet. But I need you to understand something. This isn't about me. It's not even really about Wade. It's about whether you're going to let a wealthy man from back east come in here and decide your futures for you. She looked around the room, meeting eyes. You all survived out here because you're strong enough to handle brutal conditions and isolation. You built something from nothing, and now someone wants to take it away because you're not profitable enough for his investment portfolio. What are you suggesting? Someone asked. I'm suggesting you stop fighting each other over scraps and start fighting the person who's trying to take the whole meal. I'm suggesting that stubborn frontier independence is admirable but pointless if it leaves you all bankrupt and homeless. Mara's voice hardened. And I'm suggesting that maybe the woman you all dismissed as weak and useless knows something about survival that you don't, because I've been dismissed and underestimated my entire life. And I'm still here. The silence that followed was different than before. Thoughtful. Considering. Miguel Ramirez stood up. She's right. We're so busy protecting what's ours that we're not seeing the bigger threat. One by one, others voiced agreement. By the time the meeting ended, they had a framework for cooperation, shared water access, coordinated shipping arrangements, a fund to help any member facing financial crisis. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't solve everything, but it was a start. After everyone left, Wade found Mara sitting on the porch, staring at the dark prairie. That was quite a speech, he said, settling beside her. I was tired of being silent. You've never been silent. Not with you, but with everyone else? Mara shook her head. I spent so long trying to be small and invisible, trying not to take up space. And look where it got me, blamed for everything anyway. So you decided to take up space. I decided to stop apologizing for existing. She looked at him. You think Kane will back off now? No, I think we just declared war. Good. Wade laughed. You've changed since that day in town. So have you. How? You smile more. You're less... Mara searched for the word. Less alone. I was alone for a long time before you showed up. By choice? By necessity, or so I thought. Wade reached over and took her hand. Turns out I was just scared. Of what? Of this. Of caring about someone enough that losing them would break me. Mara squeezed his hand. I'm still scared of that. Me too. They sat together in the darkness, holding hands like teenagers, while somewhere in the distance, coyotes called to each other across the empty miles, and Wade let himself believe just for a moment that they might actually survive this. That love and stubbornness and community might be enough to stand against money and influence and calculated cruelty. He was wrong, of course, but he wouldn't know that until the night Victor Kane decided that patience was exhausting and violence was more efficient. The night the winter storage barn burned with enough intensity to light up the entire valley. The night Mara almost died trying to save it. The night everything changed forever. But that was still 3 weeks away. Tonight there was just peace and darkness and the woman beside him who'd somehow become the center of his entire world. And for tonight, that was enough. The 3 weeks of peace didn't last. Kane's response to their alliance came swift and calculated. Within days, the railroad announced rate increases that would cripple independent ranchers trying to ship cattle east. Water rights that had been settled for decades suddenly came under legal challenge. Suppliers in Ash Hollow raised prices selectively. Kane's properties got favorable rates while alliance members paid premium costs. It was economic warfare, precise and devastating. The alliance held together, but barely. Mrs. McAllister lost half her herd to contaminated water when someone diverted the creek that fed her land. The Ramirez brothers found their fences cut in a dozen places, cattle wandering into Kane-controlled territory where they were impounded and held for exorbitant fees. Wade used his own savings to help where he could, but money was bleeding out faster than he could staunch it. And through it all, Victor Kane maintained his pleasant facade in town, expressing concern about the unfortunate troubles plaguing the territory while quietly orchestrating every disaster. "We need proof," Sheriff Morrison said when Wade confronted him in town. "I know what's happening, but knowing and proving are different things." "How much proof do you need?" "The pattern's obvious." "Obvious isn't admissible in court. Kane's careful, uses intermediaries, never gets his own hands dirty. So he just wins by default?" Morrison's jaw tightened. "I didn't say that. I'm doing what I can. But Wade, you need to understand, Kane has lawyers, political connections, money to burn on this fight. You've got stubbornness and a handful of struggling ranchers. That's not a fair match." "Since when has anything in this territory been fair?" The sheriff didn't have an answer for that. Wade rode back to the ranch that evening, feeling the weight of impossible odds pressing down on him. He found Mara in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with aggressive efficiency. "That bad?" she asked without looking up. "Worse. Morrison can't help without evidence we can't get. The alliance is fracturing, and Kane's bleeding us dry through 1,000 small cuts. So what do we do?" "I don't know." Mara finally looked up, flour dusting her forearms. "That's not an answer I've heard from you before. It's the only honest one I've got." Wade slumped into a chair. "Every move I make, he's 3 steps ahead. Every strategy I try, he's already countered it. I'm outmatched." "Then we stop playing his game." "What?" "You heard me. Stop playing by rules he controls. Stop trying to fight fair against someone who has no interest in fairness." Wade studied her face. There was something hard in her expression, something calculating that reminded him of the woman who'd broken her sister's husband's ribs. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Kane underestimates people like me. People he sees as weak or irrelevant or beneath his notice." Mara shaped the dough into a loaf with precise movements. "And I'm thinking that might be an advantage we haven't used yet." Listen, Kane sees you as a threat because you're powerful, respected, a man who can organize opposition. But me? I'm just the fat wife everyone thinks trapped you into a bad marriage. I'm invisible to him." "Where are you going with this?" "I'm going into town tomorrow, and I'm going to do some listening." Wade sat up straighter. "That's dangerous." "Everything's dangerous right now, but nobody pays attention to me in town. They talk around me like I'm furniture. They don't guard their words because they don't think I matter." "I don't like it." "You don't have to like it. You just have to trust me." Mara met his eyes. "Do you trust me?" Wade wanted to say no, wanted to lock her in the house, where she'd be safe from Kane's machinations and the town's cruelty. But that wasn't who she was anymore, and denying her agency now would undo everything they'd built together. "Yes," he said finally. "I trust you." "Good. Then let me do this." The next morning, Mara rode into Ash Hollow alone. Wade watched her go with dread sitting like a stone in his stomach, but he didn't stop her. She was right. They needed information, and she had access to places he didn't. The hours crawled past. Wade threw himself into work, repairing equipment and checking cattle and doing anything to keep his mind occupied. Tommy found him in the barn around midday. "Boss, riders coming in fast." Wade's heart dropped. He grabbed his rifle and headed outside. But it wasn't trouble. It was Miguel Ramirez and 2 of his brothers, their horses lathered from hard riding. "Wade," Miguel called out as he dismounted. "We found something." "What?" "Evidence, real evidence against Kane." Wade's pulse quickened. "Show me." Miguel pulled a leather satchel from his saddle and extracted several documents. "My brother Carlos works in town sometimes, doing odd jobs. Yesterday he was hired to clean out an office Kane's been renting. Found these in the trash." Wade spread the papers across a work table. They were correspondence, letters between Kane and various men throughout the territory, instructions for sabotage, payment records for hired thugs, detailed plans for forcing ranchers into bankruptcy. It was everything they needed. Carlos kept these? Wade asked. Hid them in his shirt before the foreman could see. Brought them straight to me. Miguel's face was grim. This is enough to bring Kane down, isn't it? It's enough to try. Wade was already moving, organizing the documents, his mind racing through next steps. We need to get these to Morrison immediately, and we need witnesses who can testify about what Kane's men have done. I can get witnesses. Half the territory has been hurt by this bastard. Then do it. Round up everyone who'll talk. Meet me at the sheriff's office in 2 hours. Miguel nodded and mounted up, riding out with his brothers. Wade stood in the barn, staring at the documents that could change everything, and allowed himself a moment of hope. Maybe they actually had a chance. Maybe justice was possible after all. That's when he heard the scream. It came from the direction of town, distant but clear in the still air. A woman's scream. And Wade knew, with the certainty of nightmare, that it was Mara. He was on his horse before conscious thought caught up, riding hard toward Ash Hollow with his rifle across his lap and terror clawing at his throat. The town came into view and Wade saw smoke rising from the main street. Not the thick black smoke of a building fire. Smaller, more contained. He rode into the square and found chaos. A crowd had gathered near the general store. People were shouting. Sheriff Morrison was trying to restore order. And in the middle of it all stood Mara, her dress torn and dirty, her face bleeding from a cut above her eye. And 3 of Kane's men on the ground, one holding his broken nose, another cradling what looked like a broken wrist, the third simply unconscious. Wade dismounted fast, pushing through the crowd. What happened? He demanded. Morrison turned, relief flashing across his face. Wade, good. Maybe you can... What? Happened? Your wife assaulted 3 of Mr. Kane's employees. That's bullshit, Mara said, her voice steady despite the blood. They cornered me in the alley behind the store, tried to intimidate me. When I wouldn't back down, they got physical. She's lying, one of Kane's men said through his broken nose. We were just talking, and she attacked. There are witnesses, a new voice called out. Wade turned to see Mrs. Donovan stepping forward from the crowd, of all people. I saw the whole thing from the dress shop window, she continued. Those men surrounded Mrs. Holloway and tried to force her into the alley. She defended herself. That's not... Kane's man started. I saw it too, another voice said. Then another. Within moments, 6 townspeople were corroborating Mara's story. Kane's men had started it. Mara had finished it. Morrison looked between the bleeding men and Mara's defiant face. Well, he said slowly, seems like a clear case of self-defense to me. Kane won't see it that way, one of his men spat. He'll have your badge for this, Sheriff. He can try. Now get out of my town before I arrest you for assault. The men limped away, throwing murderous looks back at Mara. The crowd dispersed slowly, people returning to their business but glancing back with expressions Wade couldn't quite read. He reached Mara and took her arm gently. Are you hurt? Just the cut. It's not deep. What were you doing in that alley? Listening, like I said I would. Mara's eyes were bright with adrenaline. And I heard something important, but we should talk somewhere private. They ended up in Morrison's office with the door closed. Mara sat in a chair while Morrison cleaned the cut on her face. She didn't flinch. Talk, Wade said. Kane's planning something big. I overheard his men talking in the saloon. They didn't notice me sitting in the corner. There's an attack planned for tomorrow night. What kind of attack? The winter storage barn. They're going to burn it during a windstorm that's supposed to blow in. Make it look like an accident, but time it so the fire spreads to the main house and other buildings. Wade felt ice slide down his spine. That would destroy everything. That's the point. Force you to sell the land or lose it entirely. Mara looked at Morrison. They mentioned payment. Someone named Carson is organizing it for Kane. Does that name mean anything? Morrison's face went dark. Jack Carson. Hired gun. He's been in the territory for about 3 weeks, ever since Kane arrived, Wade finished. We need to move tonight, Morrison said. If Carson's involved, this is serious. The man doesn't fail. We have the documents, Wade said. Miguel Ramirez found correspondence proving Kane's behind all the sabotage. We were going to bring them to you. Documents won't stop an attack that's already in motion. We need to... The office door burst open. Tommy stood there, breathing hard, his face white. Boss, there's fire at the ranch. The winter barn's already burning, and it's spreading fast. For a moment, Wade couldn't process the words. Tomorrow night, Mara had said, but Kane had moved the timeline up, which meant Mara's intelligence had been fed to her deliberately. It was a trap. We need to go, Wade said, already moving. Wait, Morrison called. Wade, if this is deliberate, they'll be waiting. But Wade was already gone, running for his horse with Mara right behind him. They rode through the late afternoon with the smoke visible on the horizon, growing thicker and darker with every mile. Wade's mind raced through scenarios. The winter storage barn held feed, equipment, supplies they'd need to survive the next cold season. Losing it was devastating but survivable, unless the fire spread. If it reached the main house, the other barns, the bunkhouse, they'd lose everything. They crested the final ridge, and Wade's worst fears materialized in front of him. The winter barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching 30 feet into the air. The wind had picked up. Kane had timed it perfectly, and sparks were already catching on the dry grass between the barn and the main house. Ranch hands were fighting the fire with water from the well, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Wade dismounted and ran toward the chaos. "Boss!" Charlie shouted over the roar of flames. "We've been trying to stop it, but the wind keeps pushing it toward the house." "Forget the barn," Wade ordered. "Wet down the house and the other buildings. Create a fire break between them and the flames." "Already tried. The grass is too dry." "Then cut the grass. Dig a trench. Do whatever it takes." Men scattered to follow orders. Wade grabbed buckets and joined the desperate effort to save what could be saved. The heat was brutal. Smoke choked the air. Ash fell like black snow. And somewhere in the chaos, Wade lost track of Mara. He didn't realize she was missing until he heard Tommy screaming her name. Wade spun around to see flames spreading toward the small equipment shed near the burning barn, and Mara running toward it. "There are people inside," she shouted. "I heard them yelling." "Mara, no!" But she was already gone, disappearing into the smoke. Wade dropped everything and ran after her. The heat was overwhelming. The smoke was so thick he could barely see 3 feet ahead. He called Mara's name, stumbling through the chaos. Then he heard it. Voices coming from the equipment shed. Screaming. Wade reached the shed to find the door blocked by fallen debris. Through a gap in the wooden slats, he could see 2 figures trapped inside, and Mara trying to lift the debris alone. "Help me!" she screamed when she saw him. Together they threw their weight against the beam blocking the door. It shifted, groaned, finally gave way. The door swung open, and 2 people stumbled out, Mrs. McAllister and her teenage son, coughing and covered in soot. "We came to help," Mrs. McAllister gasped. "Got trapped when the shed caught—" "Get to the house," Wade ordered. "Now!" They ran. Wade turned to grab Mara, to pull her away from the flames. That's when he heard the crack. The equipment shed's roof was collapsing. Wade moved on instinct, tackling Mara, and rolling them both away from the building as burning timber crashed down where they'd been standing seconds before. They lay in the dirt, gasping for air, while fire consumed everything around them. "Can you move?" Wade asked. "Yes." "You?" "Yeah." They helped each other up and stumbled back toward the relative safety of the main yard. The winter barn was a total loss, collapsing in on itself in a shower of sparks and ash. But the fire break the ranch hands had created was holding, barely. The flames hadn't reached the house or the other critical buildings. They'd saved what mattered most. Wade sank to his knees in the dirt, watching the barn burn, feeling the weight of loss and exhaustion, and too much adrenaline crashing through him all at once. Mara collapsed beside him, her torn dress now black with soot, her face streaked with ash and sweat. "You ran into a burning building," Wade said. "People were trapped. You could have died. So could you. You followed me in. That's different." "How?" Wade didn't have an answer for that. They sat together while the ranch hands fought to contain what remained of the fire and the smoke billowed into the darkening sky. "This was Kane," Mara said quietly. "This was his response to us organizing, to me fighting back. I know. He tried to kill us. I know. What do we do?" Before Wade could answer, Sheriff Morrison rode into the yard with 6 deputies and Miguel Ramirez. Morrison dismounted and walked over to where Wade and Mara sat in the dirt. "I arrested Jack Carson an hour ago," he said without preamble. "Found him at the hotel with evidence linking him to the fire, and Miguel brought me those documents you mentioned." Wade looked up, barely daring to hope. "We have enough to charge Kane with arson, conspiracy, sabotage, and about a dozen other crimes," Morrison continued. "His operation in this territory is finished." "You're sure?" "I've got Carson in custody, willing to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. I've got written evidence of Kane's plans, and I've got 24 ranchers ready to tell their stories in court." Morrison offered Wade a hand up. "It's over, Wade. You won." Wade let the sheriff pull him to his feet. He looked at the burning wreckage of the winter barn, then at the house and buildings they'd managed to save, then at Mara, sitting exhausted in the dirt. "Doesn't feel like winning," he said. "It never does. But you're alive. Your ranch is still standing, and Kane's going to spend the next several years in prison if I have anything to say about it." Morrison glanced at Mara. "Your wife's got good instincts. If she hadn't figured out the plan and warned us, this could have been much worse. She's full of surprises." Clearly, Morrison left to coordinate with his deputies. Wade walked back over to Mara and extended his hand. She took it and let him pull her up. They stood together in the firelight, covered in soot and ash, and the evidence of how close they'd come to losing everything. "The town saw me fight today," Mara said. "Kane's men and the fire. They saw me." "I know." "Some of them helped, testified that Kane's men started it, confirmed my story." "Mrs. Donovan surprised me," Wade admitted. "She told me something while Morrison was cleaning my cut. Said she was tired of being cruel because cruelty was expected. Said watching you defend me made her realize she'd been defending all the wrong things." "That's quite a revelation." "People change when they're forced to see themselves clearly." Mara looked at the burning barn. "We lost a lot tonight." "We did, but we saved more." "We did. And Kane's finished." "He is." Mara turned to face Wade fully. In the firelight, covered in ash, bleeding from the cut above her eye, she looked like some ancient warrior returning from battle. "I love you," she said. The words hit Wade harder than the collapsing roof beam had. "Mara Shea, I know we've never said it. I know this started as an arrangement, but I need you to know that I love you. Not because you saved me, not because you gave me security, but because you saw me when nobody else would. Because you chose me when I didn't choose myself. Because you fought for me every single day since we met." Wade pulled her close, not caring about the soot or the smoke or the fact that half the ranch was watching. "I love you too," he said into her hair. "From that first day in town, from the moment you told me you didn't want to be there, I loved your honesty before I even knew what to do with it." They held each other while the barn burned down to embers and the crisis slowly resolved around them. The Ramirez brothers arrived with their families. Mrs. McAllister and her son, saved from the equipment shed, brought food and blankets. Other Alliance members appeared throughout the evening, offering help and support and solidarity. By midnight, the fire was out. The winter barn was gone, but everything else had survived, and Victor Kane was in custody, his empire in this territory crumbling as quickly as he'd built it. Wade stood on his porch in the early morning hours, watching the sun rise over smoke-stained land, and tried to process everything that had happened. Mara emerged from the house with 2 cups of coffee and handed him one. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Too much adrenaline still." "Same." They sipped coffee and watched the day begin. "What happens now?" Mara asked. "We rebuild. Bury Kane under so much legal trouble he never threatens anyone again. Make sure the Alliance stays strong so this can't happen to anyone else." "That's the practical answer. What about us?" Wade looked at her. "What do you want to happen with us?" "I want—" Mara paused, searching for words. "I want to stop calling this an arrangement. I want to actually be your wife. Not just on paper or for appearances, but really. We've been really married for months now." "Have we?" "You run this ranch as much as I do. You sleep under my roof. You risked your life to save my neighbors. You stood up to an entire town's worth of cruelty and never backed down." Wade set his coffee aside and took both her hands. "You're the strongest person I know, Mara Holloway, and you've been my wife in every way that matters since about 3 days after you arrived." "Then why does it still feel fragile? Because we've been fighting so hard to survive, we haven't had time to just live. Wade pulled her closer. But Kane's finished. The town's starting to come around, and we've got a ranch to rebuild and a life to actually live instead of just defend. You make it sound simple. It won't be. Nothing worth having ever is, but we're good at fighting. Maybe we can be good at the other parts too. Mara smiled, tired but genuine. I broke 3 men's bones yesterday and saved 2 people from a fire. I think I can handle being a rancher's wife. You've been handling it since day one. Tommy appeared around the corner of the house, looking apologetic about interrupting. Boss, sorry, but the McAllisters want to talk about rebuilding plans, and Miguel's here with some of the others. They want to coordinate security going forward. Tell them I'll be there in 10 minutes. Tommy nodded and disappeared. Wade turned back to Mara. Duty calls. It always does. She squeezed his hands. Go. I'll start figuring out what we need to replace from the barn inventory. Mara? Yeah? Thank you for fighting, for staying, for being exactly who you are. Thank you for choosing me when nobody else would. I'd choose you again, every time. He kissed her, quick but sincere, then headed toward the barn where ranchers were gathering to plan their next moves. Behind him, Mara stood on the porch of the house they'd defended together, watching the morning light spread across land they'd fought to keep. The woman nobody had wanted, the one who'd stood at the end of the line expecting nothing, had become the heart of everything that mattered. And as the territory slowly rebuilt around her, as former enemies became allies, and the town learned to see past their own prejudices, Mara Bennett Holloway finally understood what Wade had tried to tell her months ago. She'd always been enough. She'd always been strong. She'd just needed someone to notice. And now, standing on the porch of the ranch she'd helped save, surrounded by people who'd learned to respect her, loved by a man who'd seen her worth from the very beginning, Mara allowed herself to believe in permanence, in belonging, in home. The storm had passed, and she was still standing. The rebuilding took 6 months. 6 months of dawn-to-dusk work, coordinating materials and labor, negotiating with suppliers who suddenly found their prices more reasonable now that Kane was in prison awaiting trial. 6 months of the Alliance ranchers working together, sharing resources and manpower in ways that would have been unthinkable a year ago. And 6 months of Wade and Mara learning what it meant to build a life instead of just survive one. The new storage barn went up in August, larger than the old one, with better ventilation and fire-resistant design. The Ramirez brothers helped frame it. Mrs. McAllister's sons worked on the roof. Even old man Peterson showed up one day with lumber he claimed he didn't need, though everyone knew he'd bought it specifically to contribute. Heard you folks could use this, he'd said gruffly, not quite meeting Wade's eyes. Figure I owe you something for standing up when I didn't have the spine to. The town's transformation was slower, but just as real. It started small. Mrs. Donovan stopped crossing the street when she saw Mara coming. Then she started nodding and greeting. Then one day she actually spoke. I owe you an apology, she'd said outside the general store, her voice stiff with discomfort. For the things I said, the way I treated you. It was cruel and it was wrong. Mara had studied her for a long moment before responding. Yes, it was. I don't expect forgiveness. Good, because I'm not ready to give it yet. Mara softened slightly. But I appreciate you saying it anyway. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was honest. And honesty was something Mara valued more than false pleasantries. Other apologies followed, some sincere, some awkward, some clearly motivated by social pressure rather than genuine remorse. Mara accepted each one with the same measured response. She didn't forgive easily, but she didn't hold grudges either. Life's too short to carry that much anger, she told Wade one evening while they sat on the newly rebuilt porch. I spent too many years angry at the world. I'm tired of it. You're allowed to be angry at people who hurt you. I know, but anger doesn't rebuild barns or plant crops or create the life I actually want. She looked at him. I'd rather spend my energy on things that matter. Wade understood that impulse. He'd spent his own years carrying anger like armor, and it had kept him alive but also kept him alone. Until Mara. The trial happened in September. Victor Kane's lawyers tried every trick they knew, delays, technicalities, character assassinations of anyone willing to testify against him. But the evidence was overwhelming. Jack Carson's testimony was damning, and the list of Kane's victims stretched across 3 territories. The verdict came back guilty on 17 counts. 20 years in federal prison. Wade and Mara sat in the courtroom when the sentence was read, surrounded by the other Alliance ranchers who'd come to witness justice finally catching up with a man who'd thought himself untouchable. Kane's face didn't change when the judge announced his fate. He just looked at Wade with cold eyes, and something that might have been respect in a different context. "You fought well," Kane said as they led him away in shackles. "Better than I expected." "Should have left when you had the chance," Wade replied. "Perhaps, but I've never been good at backing down." "Neither have we. That's why you lost." Outside the courthouse, reporters from territorial newspapers tried to get statements. Wade ignored them, but Mara stopped. "What does this victory mean to you, Mrs. Holloway?" one asked. Mara considered the question carefully. "It means that money and influence don't always win. It means that people who stand together are stronger than individuals trying to control everything alone. And it means that the world occasionally surprises you by choosing justice over convenience. There are rumors that you were instrumental in gathering evidence against Kane. Can you comment on that?" "I did what anyone would do when their home was threatened. I paid attention, I listened, and I refused to be invisible just because people expected me to disappear." The reporter scribbled notes. "You've become something of a symbol in this territory, the woman who stood up to Victor Kane. How does that feel?" "Exhausting, mostly," Mara said honestly. "I didn't set out to be a symbol, I just wanted to survive. But if my story helps other people find their own strength, then I guess it's worth the attention." She walked away before they could ask more questions, joining Wade where he waited with the horses. "You handled that well," he observed. "I've had practice being stared at. Might as well give them something worth staring at." They rode home through autumn-bright landscape, the territory transformed by the season and by everything that had happened within it. The next major shift came in October. The town council approached Wade with a proposal. They wanted him to run for territorial representative. The position would give him a voice in land management decisions, water rights disputes, and economic development for the entire region. "Why me?" Wade asked when Councilman Pritchard presented the idea. "Because you've proven you care about more than just your own property. You organize the ranchers, you stood up to Kane, you fight for what's right even when it costs you." Pritchard shifted uncomfortably. "And because we need someone who won't be bought or intimidated, that's you." Wade brought the proposal home to Mara that evening. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think it's a lot of responsibility." "That's not an answer." Mara set down the harness she'd been repairing. "I think you'd be good at it. I think you care about this territory and the people in it, but I also think it would mean less time at the ranch, more politics, more dealing with people who frustrate you." "All true. So the question is whether you want that life." Wade sat down across from her. "The question is whether we want that life. This decision affects you as much as me." "Does it?" "I wouldn't be the representative." "No, but you'd be the representative's wife. You'd have to attend functions, deal with social obligations, represent the territory in ways that would put you in front of people constantly." Mara was quiet, thinking it through. "A year ago, that would have terrified me," she said finally. "The thought of being visible like that. Of being judged and examined and criticized in public. And now? Now I think maybe I'm tired of hiding. Maybe I'm ready to show people that women like me can stand in public spaces without apologizing for it. That's not a small thing." "No, but then, nothing about this last year has been small." Mara met his eyes. "If you want to do this, I'm with you. If you don't, I'm still with you. But don't make the decision based on protecting me. I can handle whatever comes." Wade reached across the table and took her hand. "I know you can. You've proven it 100 times over. So what do you want to do?" Wade thought about the territory, the ranchers struggling to survive, the systems that needed changing, the future that needed building. "I want to try," he said. "I want to make this place better for people who come after us." "Then let's do it." The campaign was brutal. Wade's opponent was a wealthy landowner from the southern part of the territory who ran on a platform of tradition and stability, code words for keeping things exactly as they'd always been, with power concentrated in the hands of men who'd held it for generations. They attacked Wade's background, his lack of formal education, his rough manners and frontier bluntness. And of course, they attacked Mara. Can we really trust a man who makes such questionable personal decisions? His opponent asked during a public debate. A man whose judgment is so compromised that he chose a woman of dubious character to represent his household? The room went quiet. Wade stood at the podium, feeling rage build in his chest. But before he could respond, Mara stood up from where she'd been sitting in the audience. Questionable decisions? She asked, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. My husband chose to marry a woman who'd defended her sister from an abusive man, a woman who helped save neighbors from a burning building, a woman who stood up to Victor Kane when half this territory was too scared to even speak his name. If that's questionable judgment, then I'm proud he questions the same tired assumptions you're trying to hide behind. The audience erupted, some in applause, some in shocked gasps. Mrs. Holloway, the moderator started, this is not appropriate. Neither is attacking a woman's character because you can't find fault with her husband's policies, Mara shot back. If you want to debate land management or water rights or economic development, then debate those things. But leave me out of your cowardice. She sat down. The hall was chaos for several minutes, but when order was restored, the conversation had shifted. Wade's opponent tried to return to personal attacks, but they fell flat now. The audience wanted to hear about actual issues, actual solutions. Wade won the debate decisively, and 3 weeks later, he won the election by a margin that surprised everyone, including himself. The territory spoke, Sheriff Morrison said at the celebration that night. They chose the future over the past. They chose courage over comfort. They chose change, Wade corrected. Now I have to deliver it. We have to deliver it, Mara amended, appearing at his side with 2 glasses of whiskey. This is a team effort. When did you start drinking whiskey? About 5 minutes ago, when Mrs. Pritchard cornered me to discuss organizing a ladies' auxiliary committee. Mara took a sip and grimaced. I figured I needed fortification. Wade laughed, genuinely laughed, and pulled her close despite the room full of people watching. We're really doing this, he said. We really are. You scared? Terrified. You? Same. They stood together in the center of the celebration. 2 people who'd started as strangers in a desperate arrangement and had somehow built something neither of them had known they needed. The years that followed weren't easy. Wade fought for water rights reform, better land management policies, protections for small ranchers against consolidation by wealthy interests. He made enemies, made allies, learned to navigate political waters that were often more treacherous than anything he'd faced on the open prairie. And Mara stood beside him through all of it. She became known throughout the territory, not as the fat woman Wade had married out of pity, but as a force in her own right. She organized relief efforts when disasters struck. She mentored young women trying to find their way in a world that still preferred they stay small and quiet. She turned the Holloway Ranch into a refuge for people who needed second chances. 5 years after the fire, a young woman arrived at their door. She was maybe 20, heavy-set, exhausted, carrying a single worn suitcase. She'd heard there was work available at the Holloway Ranch, heard they took in people others had given up on. Mara opened the door and saw herself standing there, younger, more broken, but the same desperate hope hidden behind layers of defensive protection. What's your name? Mara asked. Sarah? Sarah Chen. You run from something or run to something, Sarah? The girl blinked, surprised by the directness. Both, I guess. Good. Running from bad situations is smart. Running towards something better is brave. You need both to survive out here. Mara stepped aside. Come in. We'll find you work if you're willing. Fair wages, decent treatment. And nobody here cares what you look like or where you came from as long as you pull your weight. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Really? Really. Now come inside before you freeze. It's cold enough to crack stone out there. Wade watched from this kitchen as Mara settled the new arrival, got her warm food and a place to sleep, made her feel human after however long she'd spent feeling like nothing. You're building something, he observed later that night. We're building something, Mara corrected. This ranch has always been a refuge. I'm just making it official. How many people have we taken in now? 12 permanent residents, maybe 30 who passed through and moved on to other opportunities. That's a lot of second chances. Everyone deserves at least one. We got ours. Seems fair to pass it forward. Wade pulled her into his arms, marveling at how natural it felt now. How this woman who'd been so uncertain of physical affection had learned to accept it, even crave it. I love you, he said, not because the moment demanded it, but because it was true and he liked saying it. I love you, he said, not, yes, ma'am. They stood together in the kitchen of the house they'd defended and rebuilt and filled with other people's hope. And Wade let himself feel something he'd never quite managed before. Contentment. Not the absence of struggle, there would always be struggle, but the presence of something worth struggling for. 10 years after Wade walked past 9 women and stopped at the end of the line, he sat on the porch of the Holloway ranch watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Mara sat beside him, her hair gray now, her body showing the work of years spent building instead of just surviving. She was still heavyset, still bore the marks of a world that had tried to break her and failed. But she was also strong, confident, the kind of person other people looked to when things got hard. You ever regret it? Wade asked. Regret what? Choosing this life. Staying here when you could have left. Fighting when it would have been easier to run. Mara was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. No, she said finally. Not once. Not even on the worst days. Why? Because this is the first place I've ever felt like I belonged. The first place where I wasn't tolerated or pitied or hidden away, but actually wanted. She looked at him. You gave me that. Not by trying to change me or fix me, but by seeing me exactly as I was and deciding that was enough. It was always enough. I know that now. Took me a while to believe it. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the valley and stars began appearing in the vast sky. Down in the main yard, Sarah Chen was teaching 2 other young residents how to repair harnesses, passing forward the skills Mara had taught her, creating a chain of knowledge and survival that would outlast all of them. You know what the best part is? Mara asked. What? We didn't just survive, we built something that matters, something that'll keep mattering after we're gone. She gestured at the ranch, the people working and laughing and building their own second chances. This is legacy, not land or money or political position, but actual lives changed because we refused to give up. Wade took her hand, worn now from years of work, scarred from old injuries, but still the hand he'd choose to hold above all others. I walked past 9 women that day, he said. 9 women who were trying to be what they thought I wanted. And I chose you because you were the only one being honest about not wanting to be there. Best decision you ever made? Second best. What was the first? Deciding to stop being alone. Deciding that maybe strength wasn't about doing everything myself, but about finding someone worth standing beside. Mara leaned against his shoulder, and they watched the night settle in around them. The territory had changed in the decade since Victor Kane's fall. The alliance Wade had built still functioned, stronger now, with legal protections and cooperative agreements that made it harder for wealthy interests to prey on individual ranchers. The town of Ash Hollow had grown, diversified, become more tolerant of differences because it had to or risk irrelevance, and the Holloway Ranch had become legend, not for its size or profitability, though both were substantial, but for what it represented. People told stories about Wade Holloway, the hardened rancher who chose the woman everyone overlooked. About Mara Holloway, who survived cruelty and violence to become one of the strongest voices in the territory. About how they'd stood together against impossible odds and built something that mattered. The stories grew in the telling, acquiring mythic proportions. But the truth was simpler and somehow more powerful. 2 broken people had found each other in the worst circumstances and decided that being broken together was better than being alone. They'd built a life on honesty instead of pretense, on shared struggle instead of easy comfort, on the radical belief that worth wasn't determined by appearance or social status, but by character and courage, and the willingness to keep getting up after being knocked down. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no magical transformation that made Mara thin and beautiful by the world's standards, no sudden wealth that solved all their problems, no perfect ending where everything fell neatly into place. Instead, there was work, conflict, days when the weight of it all felt crushing, but there was also love, partnership, the satisfaction of building something real in a world full of illusions. We did good, Wade said into the darkness. We did, Mara agreed. Not perfect, but good. Good's enough. More than enough. They sat together on the porch they'd rebuilt after fire tried to destroy it, in the home they'd defended from men who wanted to take it, surrounded by the community they'd built from ashes and stubbornness and refused surrender. And somewhere in the territory, another young woman with a worn suitcase and fading hope was making her way toward the Holloway ranch, having heard the stories about second chances and the couple who gave them freely. She would arrive tomorrow or the next day, and Mara would open the door and see herself in that desperate face. And the cycle would continue. Because that's what you did when you'd been saved. You saved others. That's what you did when someone saw your worth. You helped others see their own. That's what you built when you'd been given a second chance at life, a place where others could find theirs. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of grass and cattle and the distant promise of weather changing. "Ready for another winter?" Wade asked. "With you, always. Even when the work's hard and the cold's bitter and everything hurts? Especially then. Those are the moments that matter most." Wade pulled her closer, and they sat together under the vast frontier sky, two people who'd started as strangers and become something neither of them had words for, something stronger than romance, deeper than partnership, the kind of connection forged in fire and tempered by survival and proven through years of choosing each other every single day, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because some things were worth more than beauty or wealth or social approval. Some things were worth everything. And they'd found that thing the day a hardened rancher walked past 9 beautiful women and stopped at the very end of the line, where an exhausted woman stood expecting nothing and received everything. The story people told later made it sound inevitable, made it sound like fate or destiny or some grand design, but the truth was messier and more human. It was just two people choosing to see each other clearly, choosing honesty over performance, choosing strength over perfection. Choosing love in a world that insisted it could only look one way. And that choice, repeated every day for years, had built something the territory would remember long after they were gone. Not a legend, but a life. And in the end, that was the only thing that really mattered.